Welcome, Janessa and Maggie. I'm so excited to have you both on.
We're so excited to be here. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you for
Our-
having us.
So first, I'm going to have Janessa Dunn introduce herself. Obviously, I've said her name, and we know she's the director of admission at Skidmore. But Janessa, tell us a little bit about your background in higher ed and kind of more about what you do at Skidmore.
Yes, of course. And thank you, Sally. Just as was mentioned, my name is Janessa Dunn. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of admissions here at Skidmore College here in Saratoga Springs, New York. And I am originally not from the Northeast. And so my background and educational background has been primarily in the Southeast, most recently at Wake Forest University, a medium-sized liberal arts university in North Carolina. Prior to that, I worked in admissions as well at Vanderbilt University in various roles, but ultimately as assistant director of admissions and undergraduate admissions. And my alma mater is a large public institution, a regional institution called Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia, and that space there. But home for me is Birmingham, Alabama. So I have lived in several states, and I'm super excited for our time together today.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that gives you a nice broad perspective as well, which is really helpful, I think.
Absolutely.
All right, Maggie, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. My name is Maggie Besthoff. I use she, her pronouns as well. I recently graduated from Skidmore College, class of 2024. When I was
Congratulations.
there,
Sorry.
thank you. When I was there, I was a neuroscience major with a music minor and the honors forum minor, which is Skidmore's version of kind of an honors college or an honors program. While I was there, I did quite a lot. I was a head thoroughbred ambassador with the Office of Admissions, so I know Janessa already. I also was a peer health educator, which is a program on campus that promotes health and well-being for college-age students. I was involved in faculty research. I was in 2 neuroscience research labs with faculty. I stayed at Skidmore for a summer doing research, and that kind of acted as my internship while I was in college. And I was president and vice president of a couple organizations on campus, president of NeuroSci, which is the Neuroscience Honors Society nationally. So I was president of the Skidmore chapter, and I was also vice president of the Honors Forum, our student executive board.
So I feel a little tired hearing about all that. Don't you, Janessa?
Oh my goodness. Maggie is just on it.
She is absolutely on it. I love stories like that, though, because one of the things that I frequently hear, and it's so incorrect, is that you can't do research at small liberal arts and sciences colleges. And I'm like, you are absolutely 100% wrong about that. And Maggie is one point of evidence among many. So Maggie, I promise that we are going to come back and I'm going to want to hear more about all that. But right now, what I'd love to have is Janessa kind of introduce Skidmore, like more broadly, what is it in broad strokes and what makes it special?
Absolutely, absolutely. And during my introduction, I shared that we are located in beautiful Saratoga Springs, New York. And so the location in itself is so centrally located, but it is very much a community that I have always found an affinity for, particularly in the liberal arts college space, being able to have the breadth and depth of multiple subjects, not feeling siloed in certain areas, just as Maggie mentioned in her introduction as well, but really being able to focus on creative thought matters, which is our motto here at Skidmore. So from a general perspective, we are a small, or as I like to call it, a medium size liberal arts college with around 2,700 undergraduate students, a great deal of focus but on our undergraduate students in that space. We have an 8-to-1 student to faculty ratio, and our average class sizes are consistently below 20. And so there is definitely the opportunity to build some great, healthy, strong strong relationships with faculty across many different disciplines. We are very much a residential college as well, so we feel very strongly about the experience within the college, within the classroom rather, but also the types of relationships that you build with your roommate, hallway conversations, going out onto Case Green, going to the dining hall, and having a really good lunch with students and faculty, which is what I actually did today in terms of my lunch period. But the Skidmore difference is also one in which our students are very creative, they're curious, and they're also kind. And those are the attributes that I feel deeply about as it relates to not only for an institution that I'm so proud to work for in this space, but also an opportunity where I can genuinely tell, all of our students who are interested in a liberal arts education, but particularly Skidmore, that there are some features. Yes, you're going to be successful academically, and we want to support you, but it's the culture of that curiosity and kindness that our students have, but also being able to go beyond the box there as well. So I can share a little bit more, but those are the broad aspects in terms of our size, our location, as well as the key attributes of our motto and our values.
I was actually able to visit Skidmore at this point. I think it might have been, 16 years ago or something, because I was part of a counselor tour back when I was a counselor at a high school. And what I remember, I remember the student panel especially. I mean, obviously the whole thing was great, and wow, Saratoga Springs is such a beautiful town. I mean, I thought this is a fun place to live, even though it's cold up here, like I was like, this is a really nice town. But what I thought was so cool was that this was a school with a robust arts program and a robust business program and everything in between, so because, there was no, even though it is a liberal arts and science college, they're like, yeah, you want to do business, you can do business here. There's sort of that for that student who wants to do something more applied, that is also an option. And that was something that really stood out to me. Also, the sense of humor of the students. They all kind of gently made fun of themselves and each other, but in the most gently, and supportive way. The chemistry major said, told us the things he did, and then he capped it off by saying nerdy things like that. Like that was his summary. So
Yes, and you just hit on the nail on its head, Sally. It is being able to have the do both mentality, that you don't necessarily have to be stuck in one particular area. And of course, Maggie is a great example of that, being able to pursue neuroscience and music and do so both simultaneously and graduating within the same period of time. But being in a space too, as you mentioned, being a liberal arts college with a very strong pre-professional program as well. And so business, actually, our business program, particularly our class 107 is one of our most popular introductory business courses that's challenging for students, but they have the opportunity to build, create partnerships and work as a team as a first-year student, even in that space, and have active feedback not only from their professors, but also industry leaders, some of whom may be alums, as well as upperclassmen. So there's this very strong emphasis on peer mentorship. We have several areas as it relates to mental health, as it relates to education in general, in terms of academic support, but that also it translates, into that strong level of community, which I think is beautiful.
And so, Maggie, what major did you come in thinking you were going to do both neuroscience and music, or did you have one path? I want to kind of talk about, how you discovered all these different pathways.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to do something like neuroscience related. I had never taken a neuroscience course in high school. It wasn't something that was offered to me, but I knew it was kind of an intersection between biology and psychology, both of which I loved. So I was really curious, and that was definitely a potential major for me. And I originally thought I wanted to double major in music as well because I'm an opera singer. It's something I've always done. At Skidmore, I actually did my thesis in music, which is unusual to do a thesis in your minor. Usually you do it in your major, but I did it in my minor in in a voice recital for a senior voice recital, which was great. And that was also I was very involved in music at Skidmore also because I was a Filene Fellow, which is one of the two merit scholarships. The Filene Fellowship scholarship. It's for classical musicians. And I had to apply to that coming into Skidmore. So I already knew that music was definitely going to be on the horizon for me. And I suspected neuroscience, but I was still kind of debating between neuroscience and psychology. But what I really liked about Skidmore is, I mean, they give you basically 2 full years before you have to declare. So I experimented. I took psychology 101, I took neuroscience 101, I took some introductory bio, some introductory chem, and I kind of, experienced all of those areas. And then I had a lot of support in terms of my advisors. I had 3 advisors, all to help me kind of not only decide my major, but decide which classes I should take, and should I do pre-health? That was something I was considering for a minute. So I had a lot of support, and then I ended up declaring the neuroscience major just because that's what I love to do. And I decided that was great for me. And then I decided to be a music minor for a lot of reasons. One, the neuroscience major is a very hefty major. There are a lot of like lab courses. It's very demanding, which is a good thing. I feel like I really got a lot out of it, but I think double majoring would have been difficult, and I feel like I got just as much out of my music minor. So yeah,
Well, especially if you were able to do it as your thesis. I mean, that's a
yes.
level, is that a kind of typical of the kind of flexibility that you'd find at Skidmore?
Yeah, so so we have this senior capstone requirement as one of our core requirements, and that can look very different across majors. For neuroscience, we had to take kind of a class as senior coda, and that class involved kind of reflecting on our past 4 years, talking about why liberal arts was important to us, what we gained from it. A lot of career development stuff happened in that class, so resume building, cover letter building, mock interviews, a lot of connection with alumni. So that was kind of what neuroscience required as a major. In different majors, it looks different. Some majors do require a thesis or capstone project, but neuroscience didn't. And I really wanted to do a recital. So I just decided to kind of split it up that way. And I did a ton of research in neuroscience, and I had a lot of projects and presentations and conferences. So I felt like I had kind of done enough culminating projects in neuroscience that made me really want to do a thesis in music and do a recital. So it definitely depends on the major you pick. They all have different requirements, but I would say there is a high level of flexibility. People also do multiple projects, theses, senior coda options. I mean, I have a friend who did 2 in her 2 majors. You don't have to do that, but she decided she wanted to. So I would say there actually is quite a lot of flexibility in terms of Skidmore's requirements.
Okay. And what kind of supports did you get? I mean, I imagine you had a faculty member working with you on, well, really everything you were doing essentially, but on each independent project, you have at least one faculty member. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so the summer I felt really supported, I think, from the beginning. I mean, even when I had to choose my classes the summer before coming to Skidmore, I had a neuroscience advisor for that. And then you get to Skidmore, and every first year student has to take a Scribner seminar, which is our version of the first year seminar. And your professor for that class is your advisor until you declare your major, or in my case, you can keep them if they're in the same major. So I had my Scribner seminar professor stay as my advisor. I did research with her. So I was very connected with her throughout my 4 years. I had another research advisor in a different lab I was in. I considered the pre-health track. So I had a pre-health advisor to kind of talk through all of that stuff. Even though I didn't end up doing it, that person was there to kind of talk me through what things might look like, what the steps are. So I found that helpful. And then I had a advisor in the music department. My voice teacher was my advisor on this kind of senior thesis voice recital project. So I was definitely supported, I would say, in every realm. If you double major, you have 2 advisors in each major. So most people I know who have graduated Skidmore or currently at Skidmore have 2+ advisors, even if they just have 1 major. Just by nature of you also pick people up along the way. Like one of my best friends, her Scribner seminar professor didn't keep her as her advisor because she went to a different major, but she still went to her and checked in, said, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking for my schedule. Can you take a look at it?" Because professors really want to stay connected with you. So even if there are a lot of unofficial advisors as well who give you advice and help you out along the way.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. And I just want to be clear. Some people might find this intimidating. Like, are all these people following me around campus? But I think it's really just if you need a little assistance, you can
Yes.
stop into their office.
Definitely. I don't think people are not hounding you, that's for sure. I think once you come to college, you are an adult, you are expected to be responsible for your schedule and yourself. And so, advisors are really, there are advising holds at Skidmore. You do have to meet with this person to be able to register, but they're also, not going to be super overbearing or overpowering. They're kind of I have often gone to my advisors when I, needed extra help figuring out, classes or how I'm going to structure this. But at the end of the day at Skidmore, most advising sessions, you make the schedule yourself and then they just approve it and say, this looks fine, check. So I definitely think it's not as intimidating as it sounds. I think like 3 advisors might sound like a lot, but it's really, it's from a super supportive nature, I would say. It's not overbearing at all.
Janessa, I was wondering if you had anything to add about kind of sort of the philosophy behind Skidmore making the faculty so just so accessible to the students and how that plays into the students' experience.
Oh, absolutely. And, I will lean into what Maggie has shared about the Scrivener seminar structure, which I believe is incredibly unique as it relates to how engaged faculty are before students even register for their first level of classes. That is the faculty who are making these decisions and who are ushering and who are mentoring our students in terms of their advising. And of course, I think that's reflective of the admissions process as well, where students are not admitted by a certain major, even if you want to hit the ground running, in neuroscience or music or business or these other areas. There's still this safety net, if you will, this built-in time for you to explore, for you to really kind of think beyond those boxes. And I really appreciate, particularly with the Scribner seminars, that they're structured in the way that they're fun courses that allow you to have the writing, that have the structure of how to pursue time management as a new college student. They have the structure of having a student mentor within that class, but that this is also a small group of people that you are experiencing life with during that first year. And just as Maggie mentioned, that person may not be your advisor when you declare your major, but they are your resource. And that is very common. And having this kind of team, if you will, to know that community is set there, but it's also a release the pressure of having to have it all figured out, especially when, for example, during the summer, our students are registering for classes this week here at Skidmore. And so during this time, some of them are just finishing high school. Some of them may have finished high school about a month ago. Their minds are in a very different place. And so it's great to have their faculty members with whom they will see, on campus to be like, hey, we're here for you. We're walking alongside with you in this process. We know it can be complex, but here are our next steps, right? And truly thinking about that transition from high school to college or gap year to college, and for some students, transfer students as well.
Do you have any information on, I mean, I should have asked you this before, so totally fine if you don't know off the top of your head, but I'm curious if you have information about how many students change their major in terms of what they come in with and then what they graduate with. Because I'm always trying to underline to students that it really is okay to be undecided.
Well, in particular here at Skidmore, although a
Yeah.
student may have on their application that they want to pursue this area of interest, we actually do not track that information going into the
Okay.
matriculation process. And so, just as Maggie mentioned, students have up to the end of their second year. So there
Mhm.
are students whose mind change at the beginning of their admission process. Let's just say October, November. They may have a different perspective in April or May versus August when they actually enter and get prepared to move in, right? And so we understand that. And that is coming from that liberal arts perspective, but also recognizing too that that it is truly okay to be undeclared. And this is a time to explore, and that there is that support to ensure that you're fulfilling those requirements along the way, that you're not completely out of bounds in
Mhm.
terms of your objectives there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that is where that advising really is so helpful. You have the advisors. Maggie, you yourself talked about how the health advisor was there to make sure that if that was a future goal, you were covering those bases as well. And I think that's
Mhm.
so important, that you have that support. So I'm interested in both of you. I'll probably stick with you, Janessa, and then switch back to Maggie. Is there an ideal Skidmore student? And conversely, is there a student who wouldn't like Skidmore? And not to say that Skidmore isn't an amazing place regardless, but we all know that it's about finding the right match. So what do you think,
Yes.
Janessa?
I love that question. I'm going to be very honest with you, Sally. As you all heard, I come from different perspectives as
Mhm.
it relates to different types of colleges. I love higher education institutions in general. In Skidmore, and one of the reasons why I was actually attracted to Skidmore as well is that there is truly not one student profile for a
Mhm.
Skidmore student. Um, and I say that because I cannot say the same for the
Mhm.
institutions that I've worked for and with in the past. And I say that because students are coming in as they are. And if they want to pursue academically, that creativity, that do both mentality, the support from faculty to allow you to do both.
Mhm.
Particularly if you're in the sciences and the performing arts, that in some cases may not always mesh, but for us, they go intertwined. And knowing that you may see a different type of student in both of those areas, and all of our students are not necessarily siloed,
Mhm.
in those spaces. I will say, if I were to narrow it down, a student who is willing to explore and
Mhm.
to go beyond their comfort zone. So I think a student who may not necessarily be the best alignment or the best fit is if it's a singular space that I want to do X major for this long and I want to go
Mhm.
directly into this field. Um, that's wonderful in a lot of different ways, but our
Mhm.
curriculum is set up where we're going to push the boundaries
Mhm.
in those spaces. We want you to think outside of those boxes and understand how different subjects, how different people influence that work, right?
Mhm.
And so that's one piece there, but also being a school of 2,700
Mhm.
students and being in a residential community, even for our students, all our students, you'll find a spectrum of introverts, extroverts, things of that
Mhm.
sort. Um, you will find that there is also still, even in those small groups, a willingness to connect with other people. And so there is this opportunity to do so in an interest, right? And we want our students not to necessarily be in their dorm rooms or the residence
Mhm.
halls rooms, at outside of the classroom. So those are ways that I would describe it. But Maggie, I'm really curious about your perspective as a recent grad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I definitely do not think Skidmore is the type of like homogenous place. I have friends who are really in totally different, areas and have completely different personalities. And I think that that stays true for most Skidmore students. So if you're looking for a place where everybody's the same, Skidmore's not the place. And that's one of the things I personally love about Skidmore is I feel like hear so many different perspectives and meet different types of people who have different interests, and that kind of makes me go to do all these fun things like we have this saying in admissions where it's like if you aren't an arts person or you aren't a sports person or you aren't a science person, like that's great, but you're going to have a friend who's super into it and you're going to go to those things. So that's definitely the case for me. I had friends who were on sports teams, and I'm not a huge sports person, but I loved going to their games. I ended up singing the national anthem every year at the men's lacrosse games. So that was kind of, you know, my music intertwining with my friends' sports. So it definitely, I think it's a super vibrant community. I feel like most people would love Skidmore. I'm definitely biased. I love Skidmore, but I think the people who might struggle would be people who really want like a big city or like a big community. At Skidmore, you are going to be running into people you know all the time. And if you're the type of person who would rather, you know, keep your head down and not have to do small talk on your way to class, then Skidmore is not the right place. You're going to see people you know everywhere, who are going to want to talk to you and chat. And, you know, that's the thing that I loved about it, because I loved being in a community where I'm seeing familiar faces. But I know that Saratoga Springs to some might feel really small. I come from a very rural area, so it was definitely big city for me. But for people coming from a big city, it might feel small. But yeah, I definitely agree with everything Janessa said. I think you have to be open to exploring. Even though I think we do have a, you know, our requirements, our core requirements leave a lot of flexibility, that you still have to, you know, take a fine arts, or you have to take a science with a lab. So if you're not open to exploring those areas, I think that will be uncomfortable. But I know people, and me myself, have found amazing new interests from those requirements and have really opened. I really just agree with the liberal arts message of exploring and, you know, looking at things different ways and from different disciplines. But again, if you're somebody with a singular focus who doesn't really want to, you know, explore, then I think you might have less fun at Skidmore.
Yeah, yeah. I would think too, if you're somebody who wants to kind of sit passively in the back of the, not, and I'm passive, that's the wrong word, but if you don't want to take part in a conference or a discussion, you want to sit in the back of a lecture hall and just take notes, that I would think that Skidmore's not for you. Now, mind you, I actually think it's better for students, as Janessa has said, get out of your comfort zone. You're gonna, like, going to college is not just about getting a degree, it's about learning and pushing your boundaries. So I would hope that everyone would be open to a place like Skidmore. So all right, well, this is very, very helpful. So I think, Janessa, you probably run into this all the time, and I run into it on the daily. Like, liberal arts is not practical, and it's too expensive, and how are they going to get a job with a music major? And even like neuroscience, like, what if she can't get into medical school? Like, what else is there going to be to do? She should major in business or computer science or engineering. Now, I want to say very clearly, all of those majors are great too, but what if that's not what the student wants to do? So let's kind of talk about the practicality side, and then let's also segue to the expense, because I think people don't realize financial aid, merit scholarships. So Janessa, could you maybe address that? Because I know you get that question a lot.
Oh my dear goodness, yes. Not only professionally, but even in my own college search experience, you know, I had always been at heart a liberal arts college kid, if you will. And one of the biggest questions that my parents asked is one of the expense, just as you mentioned, and also the practicality. Am I going to get a job? And one of the biggest myths out there is that, you know, a student who may want to major in English only has a finite, limited opportunity for achieving work on the other end of their spectrum in terms of their education. And that is simply not the case. And the beauty of the liberal arts education, and Maggie has talked a little bit about this as well, is being able to infuse this well-rounded core curriculum that allows you to explore different disciplines, to allow you to pursue a major like English, for example, while also bringing in these other tools, right? And these tools that are transferable skills that can apply to many different fields, whether that is going directly into employment after graduation or going to graduate or professional school as well, or fellowships, which is a very popular option for our Skidmore graduates. And so I will share with you, for my own background, I was a chemistry major. I minored in Spanish, and I was very involved in music. So it's actually interesting. Maggie and I have a lot of similar areas. And as much as I love my institution, my alma mater, the structure, I had to force that structure in order to do those. And that required me to take many more credit hours that I needed in order for me to fulfill what I wanted to do. And being able to realize that a liberal arts education would have given me that built-in structure, right? To still accomplish a really excellent STEM degree. And I will say, particularly at Skidmore, the facilities are stunning and beautiful and what you would expect at a very large public institution. So the resources are there with a little bit smaller classroom sizes, not a little bit, significantly smaller classroom sizes, but also having the opportunity and the support across our faculty to say that, yes, I know this is your interest, but I know that this is your interest too. I want to support you in both.
Right.
And having that well-rounded experience. Now, I will say outcomes are very important, particularly for our parents, our guardians, our high school counselors, community-based organization leaders, and having that pre-professional sense and those opportunities for internships, job shadowing, and research. Those can still exist. And they actually, in some cases, there may be more abundant at a liberal arts college than they would be at a large comprehensive or research university. For example, here at Skidmore, our students are not competing with graduate level students for research opportunities. They are simply not, which means the research funding, whether they're federally funded or grant funded or institutional funded, they have access to really delve in, and not only access for one project, multiple projects. And there's this flexibility and support and one-on-one attention that they can have with their faculty member, where that faculty member, their primary role is teaching. And so in terms of research, yes, that is a portion of their portfolio, but their primary role here at Skidmore is teaching, and they're bringing you into the fold where you have that type of support alongside. And so that attention is really important. Not to say it can't exist in other institutions, but the liberal arts space has that opportunity to be even more focused. But Sally, you mentioned a little bit about expenses. And so I don't want to go past that. And I know the elephant in the room is really, college is it's expensive. It's more expensive than it ever has been in the history of our country in this space, or even those who are thinking about international campuses or coming into the States as well. For schools like Skidmore, we have significant need-based financial aid. And I always like to share that there is a difference between the sticker price and the net price, if you will, for a liberal arts education. And we're an institution that meets 100% of demonstrated need for all of our admitted students. And that does include our international students as well. We're also an institution, just as Maggie mentioned, where we have some highly competitive talent-based scholarships that support the do both mentality. So Maggie mentioned the Feline Fellowship Scholarship, and being able to have a background as a classically trained musician, where it's not required to major in these areas, but we want you to be involved. And there is a supplemental merit scholarship that comes along with that, along with private lessons. And I will tell you, I was at Maggie's recital, and she was right before she graduated. And so being able to see that she can truly do both. The other one is a Porter Wackenheim Scholarship that is designed for students who are highly talented and motivated within science and mathematics. So that way you do have that hands-on approach earlier throughout your process to engage in research. And so just to know that the majority of our students here at Skidmore are graduating with if they have debt at all, they're graduating at a rate that is lower than the national average. And so even with a high sticker price, if you will, traditionally in that space, it is something that is accessible. And so I always encourage to know the difference between the sticker price, the total cost of
Mhm.
attendance, if you will, and what the net price is. And two tools, of course, are the net price calculator, which is required of all U.S. Colleges and universities to have on their website, and to utilize that tool. But there's also a shorter version called My Intuition that several colleges use on their website, including Skidmore. It gives you a quick glance to see, hey, is this something that I can do? And in some cases, for some of our students, they're actually coming to Skidmore at a lower cost than they would for an in-state public institution.
Mhm.
And so just so you all know, take a look at it first. And I'm saying this for folks like my parents when I was going through this process. Don't let it deter you in that space initially, because there are several options that students can pursue.
Mhm. Right. I really appreciate that. I'm actually my own alma mater, Reed College. It was a similar situation where students at a certain income level were graduating from Reed with less indebtedness than they were the local public universities. So I just try and tell people we can't make guarantees, but it's certainly worth it to apply, and it may very well work out extremely well. So, um, all right. So, Janessa, if I can stick with you and maybe just, I mean, we only have like 3 minutes, so I apologize, but is there anything in particular that you're looking for from an admissions perspective? Like when you're reading that application, obviously a strong transcript, but like what's your quick admissions pitch as far as what how the student should put an application together?
Oh, absolutely. And so we do practice a holistic admission review process. And so we're most certainly looking at a student's high school transcript. We're also going to be taking a look, especially if you're currently in your 12th grade year or a sixth form or the equivalent in that space. We are going to be looking at those courses and your progression throughout that year as well. But for us, because we are a liberal arts institution, we want you to continue that well-rounded education that you have, and we want to see that you're challenging yourself within the context of your school. So in terms of that holistic admission review process, we're going to be paying close attention to what's available to you at your high school and how you have challenged yourself within that curriculum. We are an institution actually that beyond the essay or the general essay, or the personal essay, if you will, we do not have any supplemental essays here at Skidmore. And one exception are supplemental essays that are embedded within the QuestBridge application, from whom we are a new partner. Outside of that, we don't have supplemental essays. And so just give yourself enough time if you're applying to other institutions. But for us, we want you to focus there. We do require recommendation letters, and we want you to choose someone who knows you well, who knows you beyond your grades, who can speak to you and how you interact with others. And we also, of course, understand that not everyone has a personal and direct relationship with their high school counselor, depending on your school context, if you've moved schools multiple times. And for us, that is our role to understand that context there as well. But ultimately, it goes back down to, for students who are most successful in this process, students who are willing to explore multiple disciplines while they're here, students who have a little bit of engagement outside of the classroom as well, even if it's in one or two different areas: part-time job, community service, extracurricular activities, Dungeons and Dragons, which is actually a club here at Skidmore. Whatever that looks like for you, we just want you to be engaged. Because just as Maggie mentioned, there are not too many silos on this campus, right? There are lots of ways for you to present yourself because, again, we're a residential campus there.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay, so join us next week when our host Shannon Vasconcelos will be joined by colleague Sarah Calvert-Kubrum, formerly of Lewis and Clark College, to discuss colleges in and around Portland, Oregon. She and finance colleague Zachary Grease will also be answering listener questions, so be sure to submit your own. You can do so on our social media pages. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. You can also download every show for free on Amazon Music or iTunes. And if you're curious about other topics, remember to look through our archives. You can find them along with our blog posts on blog.getintocollege.com. And don't forget, we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.